Hello, welcome to Do It Yourself with Wayne. Today we're out here in our yard on a little John Deere LA 115, which is very similar to a lot of the small John Deeres that are sold at the big box stores. And we're going to do a little maintenance today on our mower deck. We've got some bearings that are starting to wear out, causing a little vibration, and anytime you've got bearings starting to wear out, it also puts more load on the engine, which causes other parts to wear out quicker, like your belts and pulleys and things. So we want to get those bearings replaced, and today I'm going to pull those out. I'm going to show you how to pull them out and how to replace them, put them back together. Now the first thing you might ask is, how do I know if my bearings are worn out? Well, it's not real easy sometimes, but you may notice a lot more noise coming from your mower deck. Take this cover off. You can't wiggle your pulley here because these mower decks have a brake on them. So if you take your belt loose and you go up here and you turn the blades on like you would normally do. Now obviously I'm gonna have to stand up to do that. Okay, now flip the lever so that if the engine was running, the mower blades would be turning. Obviously the engine is off, but now if you wiggle this blade, if I turn it, you can hear that grinding noise. You shouldn't hear that grinding noise. And sometimes if you wiggle it back and forth, and I'm pulling this away, you can feel some wiggle there. Now I don't really feel any wiggle in this one, but that's mostly at the top. I think the bottom is worse. But if you spin it like that and you hear that grinding noise, that's an obvious sign of worn out bearings. And I think the other side is worse than this side, but when we get these apart, I'll show you a little bit better example of how you can see the motion that's in the bearing that shouldn't be there. But that noise, when you spin it like that, is a telltale sign of worn out bearings. Now to make this a little easier to work on and also a little easier to show you what I'm doing, I'm going to pull the mower deck out from under the mower. Now if you've got a way to raise your mower up a little bit, you wouldn't need to do that. But most people don't have those tools and facilities. So it's easier just to pull the mower deck out from under it. Basically there's one rod up at the front. I'll put a picture of that up at the top. It's got a pin. You pull the pin, it'll drop down. Under here in this area on both sides, there's a rod that goes straight up. You got a pin you pull out of it, and there's a flat rod that moves toward the front of the mower. There's a pin on it that you pull out. And of course the belt that goes from the engine back to the mower deck, you take that off, and then you can slide the mower deck out from under your mower to make it a lot easier to work on. Now I hope you can see this bearing. If you see right in here where it pivots, right in there, at the end of my fingernail, if you can wiggle this thing back and forth, you see that movement? There should be no movement there if you got good bearings. And also if you spin it, that little ting-ting is from the brake on the other side that needs to be adjusted. But you can hear that noise from the bearings. You shouldn't hear that, and especially that wiggle should not be there. That's definite worn out bearings. And if you see them like that, they really should be replaced. Now the first thing I'm going to do is remove the blades because they need to be sharpened anyway. I'm going to use my impact wrench, but if you don't have that, 15/16 socket is what generally fits these. Put it on there, a block of wood here will keep it from turning on you. And man, it's tight. Yeah, these are really tight. You may need a longer pull bar. You shouldn't use a piece of pipe on your tools, but that's a possibility too. But I'm going to use my impact driver, and I feel sure that'll be able to take them off. All right, let's get serious. All right, that gets that one. And like I said, a block of wood here, and you made a longer pull bar, just depending on how tight they are, but let's take the mower blades off first. Now the next thing we're going to do is take these pulleys off, and in retrospect, if you don't have an impact wrench and you got to use a pull bar or something like this, it would be better if you did this before you took the blade off the bottom, because with the blade on the bottom you can scotch it with that piece of wood so it doesn't turn on you. So if I try to do this now, it just keeps turning. So I'm going to put my impact tool on here, and it should be able to just take that nut off of there. Goodness, don't want to go on. There. A little bit of air pressure now, in reverse, and it comes right off. All right. Now if you take the nut off, if you have trouble getting the pulley off, now I got mine loose, you do have a brake over here that'll put some pressure on it. But if you have trouble getting this loose, put your block of wood under here and you can prise on it real good. The one thing you never want to do is never hit this with a metal hammer. If you need to hit it with a hammer, use a rubber mallet or one of these nylon looking ones. Never hit it with a metal faced hammer, because if you do, you can damage these threads and make it really difficult to put the nut back on there. So if you need to use something to prise on it, go under here and prise up. Both of these are real tight. This little short board, and obviously it's not very long, was all I needed. Just a little bit of prising and it came right off. But I just want to re-emphasize the fact that if you prising on it and you don't want to come up, you can hit it with a hammer and that'll help. But never use a hammer that's metal. Use one like this, that's nylon, or a rubber hammer, so you don't damage your threads. Now the next thing, there's 4 bolts here that hold the spindle into the casing, or whatever you want to call this part. Now I've got a, I think it's a 10 millimeter socket, fits those just great. And you could use just a regular ratchet, but I like my pneumatic tools, but you could do it either way. And just put that on there, and man, that thing's tight. Yeah, they're coming loose. They're just really tight. Okay, I cut my compressor off so you could hear me. Those 4 bolts, and this spindle should come right out of the bottom. And there's your spindle. And here again, you hear that grinding noise? That shouldn't be there. So this obviously needs to be replaced. You can go to your John Deere dealership and get this whole part, or you can go get the bearings that go in here. I'm going to take the deal of going and getting the bearings and replacing just the bearings instead of the whole spindle. So that's going to be our game plan here. Yeah, I got started on this one a little bit, and I actually found it easier to get apart than I expected. But I was actually holding it in my hand and hitting it with my hammer. Like again, don't use a hammer with a metal face, because you'll damage your shaft here. Just doing that, it comes out the bottom. You got this piece that's on top, You got all this on the bottom. And if you have trouble remembering how things go, you may want to take a picture of this. Okay? And then your bearings are right here. There's one of them, and there's the other one. And we're going to take those out and replace them. Now, part of the problem here is getting them out. Now, you'll need to drive these bearings out one at a time. And I've taken this and just turned it over on the deck. And I have a brass punch. You can use metal. You can use an old screwdriver. There's a lot of things you can use, but if you've got it, use something that's brass because you're less likely to damage something. Now, these old bearings are going to get thrown out, so it doesn't really matter too much. But what you want to do is tap a little bit on each side and work it out. Don't try to drive it all out from one side because you're likely to damage your housing for your spindle. So I'm going to stick it down through the hole to where it hits the bottom bearing. And I'm going to tap it a little bit. And then I'm going to move to the other side of that same bearing, tap it. I could feel it move a little bit. And it's coming out. As you can see, it's starting to slide out. I'm moving it just a little bit at a time on each side. And when it gets far enough, it'll fall out. I think it just fell out. Maybe not. Yeah, it did. So there's the actual bearing that is the problem. It feels good there, but when it spins in the mower, you can tell it's got wear in it. So we're going to turn it over and do the same thing for the other bearing and just knock it out. You'll likely have a lot of grease in here if you've been greasing this thing. This one's a lot tighter than the other side, but it did come out. And a lot of grease inside. You should grease these things regularly, at least once a year. Yeah, that's the one that's bad. You can't really hear this. See, I hold it up in my mic. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but I can feel the grinding as I spin it on my finger. Now, this is the other one. You don't hear that sound from that bearing. That bearing's still good. Now, I will replace it because getting it out is a lot of trouble. So I will replace it. So now I'm going to take one of these. I'm going to go to the auto parts place and we'll see if they can match it up and sell me just some bearings instead of going to the John Deere place, which is 30 or 40 miles away. The auto parts place is a lot closer. And they will likely have these parts. Okay, now I'm ready to put this thing back together. I got my new bearings. I went and got those, and went to an auto parts place and they didn't have them. I went to a place that sells high-end mowers and stuff. They did have them. These things, I probably could have got them cheaper somewhere, but they cost me about $14 a piece. So they're not cheap, but it's worth changing them out. Now, one thing that I've seen in a lot of places, and I've never done this before, but I'm going to do it now because it makes sense. These bearings are sealed. That's why you see the little orangish colored rubber there on both sides. And I'm going to pull that out on one side. I'm not going to pull both sides out. I'm just going to pull one side out. And then the side that's open, I'm going to put in toward the inside of the housing here. And I'm going to tap that into place. I may have to get a more solid surface to tap on, but it will go in there. one thing you can do is get a large socket that'll fit right on top of the metal part. And if you notice, the sound changed when the bearing's seated in the bottom. And so I'm going to turn it over. I got one to put in here. Grab another one of my bearings. And once again, I'm going to take the seal out of one side. I'm going to take my pocket knife, just going to kind of work it underneath there and pull it up. Now I'm going to make sure that the side that's open is toward the inside of the housing. I don't want that toward the outside. Then tap it into place like I did the other one. And that socket worked really good, setting it on there like that. Okay, one step that I missed was to put this spacer back inside here between the bearings. So I pulled one of my bearings out, got this out, I'm going to set it in there. And then I'm going to tap that bearing back in place. And this is the one that's open on this side. I'll put it face down like so. And then very gingerly tap it back into place. All right, there we go. Now I got my spacer back in the middle where it's supposed to be. So now we're ready to continue. So I'll put this back in here. If you notice, I keep looking over that way. It's because the other shaft is still inserted in the mower. And that's a good way to make sure that you put things back together the correct way. When I get through, I will take that one apart and do it the same way. But with it still assembled, I can always look over there and make sure I'm putting things together the right way. All right, that goes that way. I need to get this thing back out of here. Put it there maybe. And tap it down. And I'm going a little crooked. Now if you noticed when it bottomed out, the sound changed a little bit. When you're doing this, stuff like this, always pay attention to the sound that the thing makes or the hammer makes when it hits it. Because when things get into position properly, a lot of times the sound will change, and that's a good clue that you've gone far enough. Now this will mount back in here like this, like so. Make sure it's not hitting my table, and it's not. Actually, it goes in the other way. It goes in this way. Then I got my little screws that came out. I'll put them back in to mount it. All right. I'm going to go back to this little air tool and I'm going to run them down tight. Now, as I said earlier, you certainly can do this with just, a ratchet and a socket like this. You don't have to have air impact tools. They just make it a little easier. But when I'm finishing up something like this and tightening the screws down, I do like to do it by hand, just to make sure I get them all tightened the way I want them. All right, that takes care of that. It spins and there's no noise. I like that, no noise. All right, here's our pulley. Goes back on the top. Now that brake is going to have to move back a little bit, like so. And then if I can find the nut, and there it is. That goes on there. And tighten it up. All right, there we go. Works like a charm. No noise, just like it ought to be. All right, now we'll turn it around. We'll do the other side the same way, and then we'll be ready to sharpen the blades and put this whole thing back on the mower. Now here's a problem that I didn't expect to run into. This is the bearing that's out of the top of the spindle on this side. Actually, this spindle is upside down. I guess this is the bottom. But anyway, that bearing, is, you can see that it's just completely worn out inside. But what it allowed it to do was it vibrated so bad that it wore out the inside of this a little bit. So when I go to put this bearing in there, it just kind of drops in place. It should not be that loose. See how that just dropped in? If I have more trouble with this particular spindle, I probably need to replace the whole spindle because of that bearing being worn out. It vibrated enough that it wore out the inside of the housing a little bit. So that's something else that you need to watch for if your bearings are particularly bad. It can wear out the housing. And in that case, the only choice that you have is to replace the housing. Okay, now I took the pulley back off of this one. One thing I forgot to mention was when you install these, make sure you install it so that the zerk fitting, it is called a zerk fitting, but it's a grease fitting. Make sure that it's oriented in back this way so you can put your grease gun on it to add grease. And what you want to do is pump grease in there until grease starts coming out of the end. See how that just, now I had already filled this up, but see how grease just came out around the top? When it comes out like that, you know that cavity between the bearings is full, and that's all you need. So I'll take this nut back off, I'll put my bearing back on there. I'm going to lubricate some other parts here, and then we'll be ready to put this back under the mower. Okay, obviously I got the deck flipped up now, and it's time to put the mower blades back on. And I did sharpen my blades. If you're interested in how to sharpen mower blades, I've got a video about that. I'll put a link down the bottom. But never sharpen the back side. The part that goes toward the ground, it should be flat. The top side should have the taper on it. And the video about sharpening blades will tell you about that. But anyway, we're going to put this on here. Big flat washer, big nut. And then you tighten them down. And just like when we're putting them on here, you can use a block of wood. And there's usually somewhere that it'll, like that, there's always somewhere that it'll lock in and hold things. You could do this with an impact wrench, or you could use just a wrench like this. It works fine. That gets that one on there. Now let's do the other one, and we'll be about ready to put this back on the mower. So there you have it. If you need to replace the bearings in the mower deck of your little John Deere, and a lot of the other brands of mowers are very similar, if not exactly the same. So you know, it's something that a lot of people can do themselves and save yourself the service fee and all the expenses of taking it to have it done somewhere. So if you enjoyed this video, please click like and share it with your friends if you think they'd find it interesting. And we'd really appreciate if you'd subscribe to our channel, because it really helps us grow. And it also helps you find other videos that we've done for DIY stuff around the house. So now it's time to go cut some grass.